His father's passing, his mother's illness, and constant criticism, Celine Dion's oldest son René-Charles hasn't always had an easy life.
Being the oldest son of Celine Dion sounds like a dream, right? Well, that might not really be the case. The life of René-Charles Angélil has been filled with heavy expectations and a series of events that changed him forever. There are tragic details about Celine Dion's oldest son that show a much different reality than the fame suggests. Is he truly the heir to an empire or just a man trapped by his own legacy? The 14th child. Celine Dion's life started in a house that was way too small for the people living in it. She was the youngest of 14 kids in a little town in Quebec called Charlemagne. Things were so tight that her parents had to get creative with sleeping arrangements, which is why she famously spent her first months sleeping in a dresser drawer. Her parents, Thérèse and Adhémar, didn't have much money, but they did have a piano bar. Music was the family's entire identity, and every one of her siblings played or sang. Growing up as the 14th child made Celine a natural observer. She was the baby of the family, and she learned how to grab attention by standing on the kitchen table and singing for her siblings. By the time she was 5, she was already performing in her parents' bar. This is a big part of why she eventually became so obsessed with protecting René-Charles's childhood. She knew what it was like to be a little performer before she even knew how to read. She was the family's big hope, and that is a lot of weight for a kid to carry. By the time she was 12, her mom helped her write a song called Ce n'était qu'un rêve. Her brother sent the tape to a manager named René-Charles Angélil, whose name they found on the back of a record. When René finally listened to it, he heard a once-in-a-generation voice that made him cry. He was so convinced she was going to be a star that he mortgaged his own house just to pay for her first album. He was betting his entire life on a 12-year-old girl who could barely speak English. As Celine's fame exploded, René became the architect of her entire existence. He managed her image and schedule. She was becoming a global icon, sure, but her dependence on her manager only increased. They were constantly on the move, jumping from one hotel to another, and everyone paying attention began to notice that they were never seen without each other. The professional bond was tightening into something much more intense, and it was only a matter of time before the lines between the manager and the girl he discovered would vanish completely. The manager and the muse. The relationship between Celine and René started as a business deal, but it turned into the kind of obsession people usually only read about in novels. Celine has often said that she fell in love with René the moment she met him at 12 years old. To her, he was the man who could do anything. He was the one who told her she would be a star, and she believed him. As she grew up, she didn't want to date boys her own age. She was completely fixated on the man who was 26 years older than her, and she kept a photo of him under her pillow every night. Her mother, Thérèse, saw what was happening and was not happy about it. She tried everything to talk Celine out of the relationship. She told her daughter that René had been married twice before and had 3 children, and that he was not the Prince Charming Celine thought he was. But Celine wouldn't listen. She once told an interviewer that her mother eventually realized she couldn't stop them because Celine was so stubborn and so sure that René was the only man for her. They kept their romance a total secret for 5 years. In public, they were just a hard-working singer and her manager, but behind the scenes, they were building a life together. They were terrified that if the fans found out, it would ruin Celine's career. They finally decided to tell the world on the liner notes of her album, The Color of My Love, in 1993. Celine wrote that René was her secret, and she couldn't keep it anymore. She was nervous about the backlash, but the fans actually loved it. They saw the devotion René had for her, and they realized that without him, there was no Celine Dion. Their wedding in 1994 was one of the biggest events in Canadian history. Celine wore a dress with a 7-foot train and a headpiece that weighed 7 pounds. It was a literal fairy tale, and for a few years, they were the golden couple of the music world. René handled every contract and every tour detail so that Celine could just focus on being the voice of a generation. They were inseparable, rarely spending even an hour apart. They had conquered the charts and built a fortune, but the quiet moments at home started to feel empty. As they settled into married life, they realized that their partnership was missing the one thing they wanted most. They had spent over a decade building a career that was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but they had no one to leave it to. The man who had managed every single detail of Celine's rise to fame was about to face a problem he couldn't solve with a contract or a phone call. The miracle of 2001. René-Charles was such a big deal in the early 2000s. Why, you might ask? Well, his parents went through so much to bring him into the world. Celine Dion and her husband, René, basically had it all. They had the cash and the fame, but they were totally stuck on the one thing they actually cared about. They wanted a kid so bad. For a long time, it was a total struggle. Celine was out there selling out stadiums, but then she'd go back to these cold doctor offices and just hope for a break. It was a rough ride for the longest time. They were dealing with all sorts of medical stuff and getting bad news left and right. As if that wasn't enough, things managed to get even more scary. Right in the middle of their search for a child, René Sr. got a cancer diagnosis in 1999. It was like a bad movie. They were trying to start a life while literally fighting off death at the same time. They decided to freeze embryos because they just didn't know if René was going to make it. It was a massive, stressful gamble. But thankfully, their luck finally changed. Celine got pregnant, and on January 25, 2001, René-Charles was born. He was a healthy little guy, and honestly, the world just lost its mind. People in Canada acted like a new king had been born. Celine was so happy, she called him her miracle. After all that waiting and the scary hospital visits with her husband, she finally had her baby in her arms. The crazy part is that when your mom is that famous, you aren't really a private person, even as a tiny baby. René-Charles was a star before he could even crawl. Celine actually told this wild story about his birth. She was still in her hospital bed and looked up at the TV. There was the doctor, live on the news, telling the whole world her baby's weight and height. She was just sitting there like, wait, I haven't even held him yet, and he's already on the news? It was a great day, but it also made it obvious that his life was going to be anything but normal. He wasn't going to be the kind of kid who just goes to the park and blends in. He was the center of attention from minute one. He was about to grow up in this strange world where his house was basically a giant hotel, and everyone knew his face. Le Petit Prince. Once the buzz of the birth died down and they finally brought René-Charles home, things didn't exactly settle into a normal routine. You have to remember, his mom was the queen of the Vegas Strip. Most kids grow up with a backyard and a swing set, but RC grew up in the hallways of Caesar's Palace. His version of a neighborhood was a maze of backstage areas, dressing rooms, and luxury hotel suites. People started calling him Le Petit Prince, which basically means the Little Prince. It sounds fancy, and it definitely was, but it was also a bit lonely. He lived in a world of gold elevators and five-star room service, but he couldn't just walk out the front door to go to a local park. There was always a team of big guys in suits guarding and following him every single place he went. Celine was super protective of him. She had a really rough time in school when she was young, and she was terrified that if she sent him to a regular school, kids would be mean or try to use him because of her fame. So, for a long time, he was tucked away and homeschooled. He had tutors who traveled with the family. His school was wherever his mom happened to be performing that week. One week, he'd be doing his homework on a private jet to Europe, and the next, he'd be in a suite in Florida. It was a cool life, sure, but he was almost always around adults. He didn't have a pack of friends to get into trouble with. It was just him, his parents, and the people on the payroll. And even though he was homeschooled, Celine actually stressed out a lot about how he would do with his studies. She often said she wasn't the best student, so she was worried he would struggle just like she did. But the kid was actually a total natural. He cruised through math and reading without much trouble. Even so, Celine tried her best to keep things as grounded as possible. She would finish a massive show in front of thousands of people, then go straight to his room to read him a bedtime story. She was trying to be a regular mom in a world that was anything but regular. But you can only keep a kid in a bubble for so long. Eventually, it would stop making sense, and the child would have to learn how to live amongst other people. Breaking the homeschool bubble. By the time he was about 9, the whole living in a hotel thing had to change. Celine and Rene knew they couldn't keep him in that bubble forever. It was time for him to see what a real classroom looked like. They moved to Florida and enrolled him in a private school. This was a massive deal for a kid who had spent his whole life around tutors and bodyguards. For the first time, he had to sit at a desk next to other kids and actually try to fit in. Celine was a nervous wreck about it. She'd spent years worrying that he'd be picked on because of who she was. But René-Charles actually did great. He wasn't some shy kid who couldn't talk to people. He was smart, especially at math, and he found a way to make his own friends. He finally found something that was just for him: hockey. Now, hockey is a big deal for Canadians, and even though he was living in the sun in Florida and Vegas, he had it in his blood. He joined a team called the Nevada Storm. This was huge because on the ice, he was just a guy in a helmet. Nobody was looking at him like he was a miracle baby or a pop star's son. They just wanted to know if he could score. He finally had a group of guys he could just hang out with without all the cameras around. Of course, Celine was still Celine. She'd show up to his games in a custom jersey with his name on the back and go absolutely nuts in the stands. There's video of her dancing and cheering like her life depended on it. Most teenagers would probably want to crawl into a hole if their mom did that, but René-Charles seemed to handle it pretty well. It was their thing. But right as he was getting used to having his own life, things at home got a lot more crowded. In 2010, the only child era officially ended. Celine gave birth to twins, Nelson and Eddie. For 9 years, René-Charles had been the son that his parents revolved around. Now, suddenly, there were 2 crying babies in the house taking up every second of his mom's time. It was a lot to take in. Celine later said she felt pretty bad because she was so exhausted with the twins. Sometimes René-Charles would be in his room with a fever or needing help with stuff, and she just couldn't get to him right away. He had to grow up fast. He went from being the one who got all the attention to being the big brother who had to be the man, while his dad's health was starting to get worse. The 2016 tragedy. January 14, 2016, was supposed to be a day of celebration for the family because it was René-Charles's 15th birthday. Instead, it became the day he lost his father. René Sr. had been battling throat cancer for years, and by the end, he was being fed through a tube and could no longer speak. He passed away in his sleep at their home in Las Vegas just 2 days before his 74th birthday, and right on the morning of his son's big milestone. For a teenager, having your father's death forever linked to your birthday is a heavy burden to carry, and it changed his role in the family instantly. The funeral was held at Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal, the same place where his parents had married 21 years earlier. It was a somber event that was broadcast live across Canada as a national state funeral. Celine was seen draped in black lace, holding the hands of her younger twins, but it was René-Charles who had to step up and represent the men of the family. He walked behind the casket with a level of composure that surprised everyone. What is arguably the most touching moment of the whole day was when René-Charles stood at the pulpit to deliver the eulogy. At just 15, he spoke to a packed cathedral in a mix of English and French. He looked directly at the casket and said, "15 years is not a long time for a son to get to know his father. You had a busy life, but we were communicating through golf, hockey, poker, and smoked meat." He promised his father that he would live up to the standards René had set and that everything would be okay. Celine later told reporters that she was incredibly proud of his strength, saying that René-Charles was her anchor during the darkest days of her life. The aftermath of the death was brutal for the household. Celine admitted in interviews that she spent nights just watching her sons sleep, wondering how she would guide them without René's wisdom. She said that René-Charles, in particular, struggled with the sudden weight of being the man of the house. He started spending more time away from the family, throwing himself into sports, and eventually the gambling world his father loved. Celine noted that he was trying to find his own wings, but the loss left a massive void in their lives. Sadly, the tragedy did not end with his father. Just 2 days after René Sr. died, Celine's brother Daniel also passed away from cancer. The family was hit with a double wave of grief in less than 48 hours. And just like that, 2016 became the year that René-Charles lost that sheltered life he had always known. The secret musical rebellion. By the time René-Charles hit his late teens, he was tired of being the kid in the background of his mom's photos. Everyone just assumed he'd grow up to be a singer. It was the obvious path, but he didn't want to touch a power ballad. He was into rap and hip-hop, which was music that felt light years away from Las Vegas. Instead of asking his mom to help him get a record deal, he decided to see if he could make it as a ghost. He started recording tracks in his bedroom using a cheap setup. He didn't tell Celine what he was doing because he wanted to prove he could do it without her. He chose the name Big Tip, which was a nickname from his hockey days, and uploaded his songs to SoundCloud in 2018. The tracks were full of heavy bass and auto-tune, sounding more like The Weeknd than anything from the Dion catalog. The plan worked a little too well. Within a few days, his songs Catwalks and Loft Music Remix were sitting at the top of the site's R&B charts. The secret was out. When the news broke that Big Tip was actually René-Charles, the internet exploded. Celine actually found out at the same time as the rest of the world. She was stunned but supportive, even though the music was a complete shock to her. But the Big Tip era wasn't all easy wins. As soon as the public realized who he was, the nepotism baby comments started flying. People on Twitter and in music blogs were brutal. They made fun of a kid from a mansion trying to sound like he was from the streets. One magazine reviewer even told him he was embarrassing his mother's legacy. It was a tough lesson in how the world viewed him. He realized that no matter how hard he tried to hide his name, it would always be the first thing people talked about. He eventually pulled back from the music scene, realizing that if he wanted to earn real respect on his own terms, he might need to find a place where the results weren't based on opinion. He traded the microphone for a deck of cards, heading back to the one place where his father always felt most at home: the poker table, the gambler's inheritance. René-Charles did not just stumble into a casino because he lived in Las Vegas. For him, the poker table was the one place where he could connect with the memory of his father. René Sr. was a legendary figure in the high-stakes world, once rumored to have a credit line of $5 million at Caesar's palace. He was a man who famously said that gambling was in his blood, and by the time René-Charles turned 18, it was clear the trait had been passed down. He stopped trying to make it in the music industry as a rapper and started showing up at some of the most exclusive card rooms in Nevada. He began entering tournaments under the name R.C. Angélil to keep a low profile, but in the tight-knit poker community, everyone knew exactly who he was. Unlike his father, who was known for being loud and charismatic at the table, René-Charles is a quiet, calculated player. He often sits for hours wearing a hoodie and dark sunglasses, showing zero emotion regardless of the stakes. He told people around the circuit that he wasn't there for the thrill of the win, but for the math of the game. It was a way for him to use his brain in a way that had nothing to do with the Dion legacy. He had his most significant breakthrough at the 2025 World Series of Poker in Las Vegas. This is the ultimate test for any player, and he survived a massive field of thousands of players. He made it deep into the main event, finishing in 123rd place. He walked away with $70,000 in prize money, but more importantly, he earned the respect of professional players. In an interview about his hobby, he mentioned that at the table, the cards do not care who your mother is. It was the first time in his life he felt judged solely on his own performance. However, his presence at the tables has caused a lot of friction back at home. The gambling world is what fueled his father's life, but it also cost the family millions of dollars over the decades. Tabloids in Quebec and Las Vegas have reported that Celine is deeply worried about her son following too closely in his father's footsteps. There are rumors that he has spent a significant portion of his inheritance at the tables, with some sources claiming his losses are much higher than his tournament winnings. People close to the family have whispered that his late-night sessions at the Wynn and the Encore are his way of dealing with the stress of his mother's illness. Whether it is a calculated career move or a dangerous habit, poker has become the defining feature of René-Charles's adult life. He has moved away from the recording studio and toward the green felt of the casino. He is playing a high-stakes game with his reputation and his fortune, trying to prove that he has the same gambler's soul that his father was famous for. But as he spent more time chasing the next hand, the reality of his mother's health was about to force him to leave the table and return to the role of the protector. Stiff person syndrome diagnosis. When Celine finally told the world she had stiff person syndrome in 2022, it was a massive shock to everyone. But René-Charles had already been living in that nightmare for a long time. People forget that before the big public announcement, she had been disappearing from the spotlight and canceling shows for years. While the fans were confused, he was at home watching his mom lose control of her own body. Stiff person syndrome isn't a normal illness. It's a rare neurological disorder that basically turns muscles into stone. One minute you're fine, and the next, a loud noise or a bit of stress can trigger a spasm so violent It can break a bone or leave you unable to breathe. For a guy in his early 20s, seeing his mom go through that is horrible. He moved into a role that was more like a chief of staff than a son. He was the one dealing with the neurologists at the Mayo Clinic and various specialists in Colorado to find a treatment that didn't exist yet. He oversaw the implementation of her crisis plan, which involved intense physical therapy 5 days a week and specialized hydrotherapy. Because the disease is triggered by the nervous system, he had to become the gatekeeper of her environment. He was the one who decided which family members could visit and which business associates were cut off to keep her stress levels from hitting the red zone. The household became a vault. René-Charles was responsible for the NDAs and the security protocols that kept a single photo of her condition from leaking to the tabloids for nearly 3 years. He was also the one who had to handle the twins. Nelson and Eddie were only 11 when the symptoms peaked, and René-Charles had to be the one to explain why their mother was screaming in pain or why she was suddenly confined to a wheelchair. He took over the dad duties, taking them to their hockey games and keeping their schedules normal so they wouldn't be traumatized by the medical chaos in the next room. Celine later revealed in her documentary that she reached a point where she was taking nearly 90 milligrams of Valium a day just to function. A lethal dose for most people. René-Charles was the person monitoring that decline and eventually helping her transition to the grueling recovery process. He proved that he had his father's stomach for a crisis. He kept the family's secrets and maintained the estate's privacy during a time when the world was convinced Celine Dion was never coming back. The Grammys and the red carpet. The 2024 Grammys were a huge risk for the family because Celine had been away from the public eye for a long time. Nobody knew if she could handle the stress of a massive event without her condition flaring up. When the lights hit the stage and she walked out to present the final award of the night, the crowd lost it. But the most heartfelt part of that moment was René-Charles standing right there next to her. He was holding her hand and making sure she felt steady enough to walk across the floor. He did not look like he was there to enjoy the fame or get attention for himself. He stayed focused on his mom the entire time, watching her every move to make sure she was okay. He looked like the backbone of the house, staying calm while everyone else was screaming and clapping. People watching from home noticed how much he has changed physically. He has filled out and looks like a younger version of his father now. It felt like a strange repeat of history for the fans who remember René Sr. doing the same thing for Celine years ago. There is a lot of talk about whether he is taking over his father's old job as her manager. While nothing is confirmed, the way he handles himself in public makes it look like he is already the one calling the shots and making sure she is protected from the chaos of the industry. Even with all the pressure at home, he still tries to have a life that is his own. He has been dating Angelique Weckenmann for a long time, and she has been there through the rap music phase and the poker tournaments. They are seen together around Las Vegas quite a bit, but they do not post much about their relationship. People like to guess if they are going to get married soon, especially since she seems to get along so well with Celine. It is one of the few parts of his life that feels normal and away from the cameras. And if there's one thing the Grammys revealed, it was that René-Charles is finally comfortable in his own skin. He found a way to be there for his mom without losing his identity in the process. He is proving that he can handle the weight of his last name while still being the guy who loves poker and hockey. He is a protector now, and that is a role that seems to fit him better than anything else he has tried. What is your opinion on this? Do you think René-Charles is truly prepared to handle the massive weight of the Dion legacy on his own? Will we ever see Celine return to a full world tour with her son leading the way? Or has the family empire finally reached its limit? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.